Camille's wedding was nothing short of a fairy tale, golden chandeliers casting warm light over a sea of silk and lace, an orchestra playing soft, romantic melodies, and a crowd of guests who looked like they had stepped straight out of a high society magazine. It was the kind of wedding people talked about for years, the kind that made headlines in elite social circles. And I was suffocating in the middle of it. The bridesmaid dress I wore was beautiful if you asked anyone else. A pale blush color, delicate embroidery, a perfect fit. But to me, it felt like shackles. Every stitch, every perfectly placed sequin, every forced smile I had to wear was just another reminder of how out of place I was in my own family. Camille stood at the altar, radiant in her designer gown, the pride of our parents shining down on her like a spotlight. She had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, the one our parents invested everything in. And as I stood there, watching her exchange vows with her perfect husband in front of a crowd of adoring guests, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was just an extra in a play written entirely for her benefit. It wasn't until the reception that the final dagger was plunged into my back. I had wandered away from the main ballroom, trying to find a moment of quiet, when I overheard my parents talking in hushed tones near the terrace. Their voices were low, urgent, but not urgent enough to stop me from hearing the truth. "I just don't know how we'll recover after this," my mother said, her voice laced with worry. "Every last penny went into this wedding. But it was worth it. Camille deserved this." My father sighed. "We'll figure it out. Harper will manage somehow." Harper. That was me. My stomach turned to ice. "What about her college fund?" my mother asked, almost as an afterthought. Gone. It was gone. They had taken the money meant for my future, the money I had spent years believing would help me achieve my dreams, and poured it all into the perfect wedding for the perfect daughter. My hands clenched into fists at my sides, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I stepped out from the shadows, my voice trembling with barely contained rage. "You spent my college fund on this?" My mother gasped, her eyes widening with guilt for just a fraction of a second before she smoothed her features into something neutral. "Harper, don't be dramatic. We did what was best for the family." I let out a hollow laugh. Best for the family? Or best for Camille? My father sighed, rubbing his temples like I was an inconvenience. "We didn't have a choice, Harper. You'll figure something out. You're smart. Resourceful." I stared at them, waiting for some kind of remorse. Some kind of realization that what they had done was unforgivable. But there was nothing. Just dismissal. Camille, blissfully unaware, floated toward us with a dreamy smile. "What's going on?" She was glowing, her new husband at her side, a ring on her finger worth more than my entire education. And she had no idea. I could have told her. Could have shattered her illusion of the perfect night with a single sentence. But looking at her, so happy, so clueless, I knew it wouldn't change anything. I was the afterthought. I always had been. Something inside me snapped. I turned on my heel and walked away. Past the guests, past the towering cake and the extravagant floral arrangements. Past the life I had spent years trying to belong to. "Harper, where are you going?" my mother called after me, but I didn't stop. I walked out of that wedding, out of that family, and out of the life that had never truly been mine. I had nothing, no home, no safety net, no money to my name. But for the first time in my life, I was free. I learned quickly that the world didn't care about my pride. It didn't care that I had left behind a life of privilege, that I had been betrayed by my own parents, or that I had spent years believing in a future that no longer existed. All the world cared about was whether I could pay rent at the end of the month. The first night away from home, I crashed on my best friend Lena's couch. She didn't ask questions, she just handed me a blanket, made some tea, and let me sit in silence. It wasn't until the next morning, when I woke up to the sound of her making breakfast, that she finally asked, "So, what's the plan?" The plan? I didn't have one. I had walked out of that wedding with nothing but the dress on my back and my phone in my hand. My car was technically in my name, but my parents had paid for it, which meant they could take it back at any time. I had no job, no degree, and no money. "I'll figure it out," I muttered, echoing the same words my father had used when he so carelessly dismissed my future. Lena didn't press me, but I could see the concern in her eyes. She had been my best friend since high school, the one person who always believed in me, even when my own family didn't. And now, she was watching me unravel. I spent the next few days job hunting, sending out applications to anything and everything. But without a degree, the options were limited. Finally, after what felt like 100 rejections, I landed a waitressing job at a small diner a few blocks from Lena's apartment. The pay was abysmal, the hours were long, and the customers were unpredictable. But it was a job. And right now, a job was survival. The first few weeks were a blur of exhaustion. I woke up at dawn, worked double shifts, and came home so tired I could barely think. But it wasn't enough. Rent, groceries, gas, it all added up, and my paycheck barely covered the basics. Desperation pushed me to take a second job bartending at a nightclub. The hours were brutal, serving coffee and pancakes in the morning, pouring shots, and dealing with drunk patrons at night. I lived off caffeine and sheer willpower, squeezing in community college classes whenever I could afford them. There were nights when I barely slept, nights when my body ached so badly I thought I'd collapse. But I didn't have a choice. One particularly bad night, I sat on the cold tile floor of Lena's tiny bathroom, staring at my bank account. $10. That was all I had left. I had a rent payment due in 2 days, a tuition deadline looming, and no idea how I was going to make it work. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. Instead, I just sat there numb. Lena found me like that, her face tight with worry. "Harper, you can't keep doing this." I let out a humorless laugh. "What choice do I have?" She hesitated, then sat down beside me. "What if you stopped just trying to survive? What if you actually built something?" I frowned. "Lena, I don't have time for a motivational speech right now. I'm serious." She pulled out her laptop and opened a folder labeled Business Ideas. "You know, I've been thinking about starting my own company. Event planning. Small scale, at first, networking events, launch parties, things like that." I stared at the screen, my brain struggling to process the words. She continued, her voice full of excitement. "I know you don't see it yet, but you're amazing at this stuff. You practically planned Camille's wedding yourself. You handled everything, the caterers, the decorators, the seating charts. You saw all the little details our parents didn't." I scoffed. "Yeah, and look where that got me." She shook her head. "That wasn't your fault. And it wasn't a waste. You have a skill set, Harper. You're organized, you're sharp, and you don't take bullshit from anyone. You could do this." I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell her that it was impossible, that I was too tired, too broke, too defeated. But the words wouldn't come. Because deep down, a tiny, stubborn part of me whispered, what if? What if I stopped waiting for an opportunity to fall into my lap? What if I stopped letting my parents' betrayal define me? What if I actually took control of my life, instead of just trying to survive it? I exhaled slowly. "How?" Lena's eyes lit up. "We start small. I have some savings, I can put in the initial investment. You do the planning, I handle the networking. We take on one event at a time, build a reputation, and grow from there." It was reckless. It was insane. And yet, for the first time in months, I felt something other than exhaustion. I felt hope. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Lena and I spent every free moment building our vision. We came up with a name, Ruby Events, a nod to resilience, to something beautiful forged under pressure. We designed a website, printed business cards, and started reaching out to local businesses. At first, the responses were lukewarm at best. No one wanted to take a chance on two nobodies with no experience. But we kept pushing. We offered discounted rates, worked for next to nothing just to prove ourselves. Slowly, the jobs started coming in, a small startup looking to host a launch party, a local author in need of a book signing event. Each success built momentum, and soon, word of mouth began to spread. I juggled Ruby Events alongside my 2 jobs, barely sleeping, pouring every ounce of energy into making it work. And then, our first big opportunity came. A well-known businesswoman in the city was hosting an exclusive networking event. She had seen one of our smaller projects and was willing to give us a chance. It was our shot at legitimacy, a chance to break into the elite circles that had once dismissed me. I worked tirelessly, planning every detail to perfection. I refused to fail. The night of the event, as I stood in the beautifully decorated venue, watching guests mingle, watching our hard work come to life, I realized something. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building something. For the first time since walking out of Camille's wedding, I felt like I had control over my life. Like I had a future worth fighting for. And I wasn't going to stop until I had everything they told me I couldn't have. The day we officially launched Ruby Events, I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, staring down into the unknown. It wasn't just a business, it was a lifeline, a desperate attempt to claw my way out of the wreckage my family had left me in. I had spent months barely scraping by, working myself to the bone just to keep a roof over my head. But now, for the first time, I wasn't just trying to survive. I was trying to build something. Lena and I sat in her tiny apartment, the walls covered in mood boards, planning charts, and financial spreadsheets. Our website had just gone live, and our inbox was pitifully empty. No inquiries. No bookings. Nothing. So, now what? I asked, staring at the screen as if sheer willpower would summon clients out of thin air. Lena grinned. Now we hustle. And hustle we did. We started small, reaching out to local businesses, startups, and anyone who might need an event planned, but didn't have the budget for a big agency. Most of them didn't even bother responding. The ones who did either brushed us off or told us they already had event planners. Rejection after rejection, door after door slammed in our faces. But we refused to quit. We offered to do events for free, small networking nights, launch parties, pop-up shops, anything that would get our name out there. We spent long nights designing pitch decks, sending cold emails, and networking with people who barely glanced our way. And then, finally, a breakthrough. A local tech startup was hosting a product launch, and their original event planner had backed out last minute. They were desperate, and we were willing. It was our first real chance to prove ourselves. I threw myself into the planning, every detail meticulously crafted. I coordinated vendors, found the perfect venue, and even personally negotiated sponsorship deals to keep costs low. The event had to be flawless. It was our one shot at getting our name out there. The night of the launch, I stood in the venue, nerves coiled tight in my stomach. The room was filled with industry professionals, investors, and reporters. If anything went wrong, it wouldn't just be an embarrassment. It would be the end of Ruby Events before it even had a chance to begin. But as the night unfolded, something incredible happened. Everything went perfectly. Guests mingled, the lighting was impeccable, the catering was on point, and the startup's product was showcased beautifully. By the time the night ended, people were coming up to me, asking for my card, telling me they had events coming up and needed someone like me to handle them. That single night turned into 3 more bookings. Those bookings turned into referrals. And suddenly, Ruby Events wasn't just a desperate dream anymore. It was real. Scaling up. The next few months were a blur of nonstop work. Lena and I worked ourselves to exhaustion, taking every job we could, no matter how small. We reinvested every penny we made back into the business, better branding, professional photo shoots, marketing materials. Word spread faster than we could have imagined. Our reputation for delivering high-quality events at an affordable price caught the attention of bigger companies. Within a year, we had transitioned from small networking events to planning corporate galas, product launches, and exclusive high-society gatherings. And the best part? We did it all on our own. No handouts. No trust funds. No connections from my family. We built this from nothing, and that was what made every sleepless night worth it. But with success came unexpected challenges. The price of growth. As Ruby Events grew, so did the pressure. The business that had once been a 2-woman show out of a tiny apartment was now handling events for some of the biggest companies in the city. We needed staff, office space, and a bigger budget to keep up with demand. And that meant taking risks. One of our biggest clients, a luxury brand launching their newest collection, wanted us to handle their event. It was our biggest contract yet, worth more than anything we had ever done. But they had one condition. They wanted us to book the most exclusive venue in the city, the Regal Grand Hotel. The same hotel where Camille's wedding had taken place. I hadn't stepped foot in that building since the night I walked out on my family. The idea of going back, of standing in the same space that had once been a symbol of everything stolen from me, made my stomach turn. But business was business. So I swallowed my pride, called the venue, and secured the booking. The day of the event, as I walked through the grand entrance, memories hit me like a freight train. The gilded chandeliers, the polished marble floors, the distant sound of a string quartet, it was all exactly as I remembered. Except this time, I wasn't here as an afterthought. I was here as the one in charge. The event was a massive success. Guests raved about the seamless execution, the brand was thrilled, and the venue staff, many of whom had been there during Camille's wedding, looked at me with something new in their eyes. Respect. I had come full circle. I left that night with something far more valuable than a paycheck. I left with the undeniable proof that I had built something greater than my parents had ever imagined for me. Taking over the industry. By our third year, Ruby Events was one of the fastest-growing event companies in the country. We were no longer just taking gigs, we were setting industry standards. Our client list included Fortune 500 companies, celebrities, and top-tier brands. I had gone from scraping by on minimum wage to sitting in boardrooms, negotiating six-figure contracts. And the best part? I had done it without them. Without my parents. Without their money. Without their approval. Everything they had taken from me, I had rebuilt tenfold. Lena and I expanded our team, bringing in top talent, hiring event coordinators, designers, and logistics experts. We moved into a sleek office in the heart of the city, a far cry from the cramped apartment where it all began. And yet, despite everything we had achieved, there was still one thing left unfinished. I had proven my parents wrong. Now, it was time to show them. The return. A major milestone loomed ahead, our first company-hosted gala. Not for a client, but for us. A grand celebration of everything we had built, an industry-defining event that would cement Ruby Events as a powerhouse. And I knew exactly where I wanted to host it, the Regal Grand Hotel. The same venue where my parents had spent every penny of my college fund on Camille's wedding. The place where I had lost everything. Only this time, I wasn't a guest. I was the one calling the shots. The moment the contract was signed, I sent out invitations. And I made sure my parents received theirs. Not because I wanted their approval, but because I wanted them to see. To stand in the same ballroom they had once filled with love for Camille and witness the empire I had built from the ground up. They had gambled on the wrong daughter. And now the world would know it. When the invitation reached my parents, I imagined the moment vividly. My mother, carefully opening the pristine envelope, her perfectly manicured nails tracing over the gold-embossed lettering of Ruby Events' first annual gala. My father, reading over her shoulder, brows furrowed as realization sank in. This wasn't just an event. It was a declaration. I had built something they never thought I could. And I was inviting them to witness it firsthand. Camille received hers, too. I had no doubt she would recognize the name of the venue instantly. The Regal Grand Hotel. The place where she had once been the star of the show, where she had basked in the attention of our parents and guests, oblivious to the fact that her wedding had cost me my future. Only this time, she wouldn't be in the spotlight. I would. The call. 3 days after the invitations were sent, my phone rang. I wasn't surprised to see my mother's name flash across the screen. I let it ring twice before answering. Harper. Her voice was controlled, careful, but I could hear the strain beneath it. Your father and I received your invitation. I leaned back in my chair, watching the city skyline through my office window. And? She hesitated, then sighed. We're surprised. We didn't realize your business had grown so much. Translation: we didn't expect you to succeed. I let the silence stretch long enough for discomfort to settle. Then, casually I said, well, it has. And the gala is an annual event now, so I figured it was time for you to see what I've built. Another pause. Then she cleared her throat. Your father and I would love to come. Would love to come. As if this were a casual social gathering and not a reckoning. I knew what she really wanted, to smooth things over, to act as if years of neglect and betrayal could be erased with one night of polite conversation. Good, I said, keeping my voice neutral. I'll have seats reserved for you. I didn't offer more. I didn't ask about Camille. I didn't pretend to care about their sudden interest in my life. And that silence? That was my power. Camille's plea. The next call came a day later. Camille. I stared at the screen, debating whether to answer. But curiosity won. Harper, she breathed, her voice softer than I remembered. Hey, hey. A beat of silence. Then, I saw the invitation, she said. I wasn't sure if you meant to send me one. I let out a short laugh. Oh, I meant it. She exhaled, and I could hear the tension in her breath. I guess I should say congratulations. I could almost see her, sitting in whatever carefully curated space she lived in now, twisting a strand of hair around her finger the way she always did when she was nervous. But I wasn't feeling generous. You don't have to say anything, Camille. Another pause. Then, finally, things haven't been easy for me, Harper. I didn't respond. She took that as permission to continue. Alex and I. She hesitated, as if saying it out loud made it more real. We're getting a divorce. I wasn't surprised. I had seen the cracks forming years ago. I don't have a job. And Mom and Dad, well, you know they're struggling. My lips curled in something that wasn't quite a smile. Struggling? The same parents who had told me to figure something out when they drained my college fund? The same parents who had always cushioned Camille's failures while letting me drown? For the first time, they were facing the consequences of their choices. She hesitated. Then, softer, I need help, Harper. There it was. Not an apology. Not an acknowledgement of what they had done to me. Just another request. I leaned back in my chair, fingers tapping idly against the desk. And what exactly do you want me to do about it? She swallowed. I was hoping. Maybe you could get me a job? Something at Ruby events? I could help with. No. The word was sharp, final. She blinked. Harper, please. I know we've had our differences, but we're sisters. A bitter laugh escaped me. Were we? Because I don't remember you being much of a sister when I was left with nothing. She sucked in a breath. I didn't know, Harper. I swear, I didn't know they used your college fund for my wedding. Maybe you didn't, I admitted. But you benefited from it. And you never once questioned why. Silence. For the first time, I heard something break in her voice. I don't know what to do. I have nothing. For a moment, just a moment, I almost softened. But then I remembered every time I had struggled alone. Every night I had worked double shifts just to survive. Every humiliation I had endured while she had been pampered and protected. You'll figure something out, I said, throwing my father's words back at her. You always do. And then I hung up. The night of the gala. The Regal Grand Hotel had never looked more stunning. The ballroom was bathed in warm golden light, the air filled with the sound of elegant conversation and soft music. Every detail had been executed flawlessly, from the intricate floral arrangements to the personalized seating cards. This was my event. My night. I moved through the crowd with confidence, shaking hands with CEOs, investors, and industry leaders. The same social circles my parents had once worshipped were now looking to me for approval. And then I saw them. My parents stood near the back of the room, watching everything unfold. My mother's expression was unreadable, but my father, he looked uneasy. Camille stood between them, eyes darting around the room as if searching for something familiar, something safe. But there was nothing left for her here. I made my way to the stage, my heels clicking against the polished marble floors. The room quieted as I took the microphone. Good evening, I said, my voice steady. Tonight isn't just about celebrating Ruby events. It's about something bigger. I paused, letting the anticipation build. I know what it feels like to have your future taken from you, I continued. To be told you don't matter. That your dreams aren't worth investing in. A murmur rippled through the crowd. But I built this company to prove that no one gets to decide your worth except you. I turned toward the large screen behind me, where the next slide of my presentation appeared. A scholarship fund. A program for students whose families had sacrificed their education for someone else's dreams. And to make sure no one else has to go through what I did, I said, I'm launching the Ruby Foundation Scholarship. Applause erupted. And as I glanced toward my parents, I saw what I had been waiting for. Their pale faces. Their realization. They had backed the wrong child. And now, the world knew it. The night of the gala wasn't just about celebration, it was about revelation. The moment the words left my lips, the room erupted into applause. Industry leaders, CEOs, and influencers clapped in admiration, their murmurs of approval reaching me even over the sound of the music. But my focus wasn't on them. It was on my parents. They stood at the edge of the crowd, their faces frozen in shock. My mother, always so poised, had lost her practiced elegance. Her mouth was slightly parted, her eyes darting between the screen and me. My father's jaw was clenched, his hands shoved into the pockets of his expensive suit, his entire demeanor screaming discomfort. And Camille? She was staring at me with something between awe and devastation. For the first time in her life, she wasn't the one everyone was talking about. I took a sip of champagne, letting the moment linger before I continued. This scholarship is for students who had their education stolen from them, I said, my voice clear, unwavering. For those whose families invested in something else instead of their futures. Because no one should have to choose between someone else's dreams and their own. Another wave of applause. I let it wash over me, savoring it. I had spent years being invisible. A shadow in my own family. Not anymore. The final slide of my presentation appeared on the screen, displaying a list of initial funding sources. Donations from various business leaders. A personal contribution from Ruby Events profits. And then, at the bottom of the list, in bold letters, final donation, the Cartwright Country Club membership. A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. People turned to one another, whispering. Some gasped. Others glanced toward my parents, their curiosity palpable. The Cartwright Country Club. My parents' pride and joy. The place where they had cultivated their social standing, where they had spent weekends sipping overpriced cocktails and playing golf with the elite. It had been their sanctuary. And now it was gone. I had bought it, sold it, and funneled every penny into the scholarship fund. I turned my gaze toward my parents, meeting my mother's stunned expression head-on. Every student who benefits from this scholarship, I said, my voice smooth, controlled, will have something I didn't, someone investing in them. Silence stretched through the room, thick with unspoken words. Then applause. Loud, unrelenting. I stepped back from the microphone, my heart pounding in my chest, but I didn't let it show. I kept my posture tall, my chin lifted, as the crowd roared their approval. I had won, and they all knew it. The aftermath. As the event wrapped up, guests approached me, eager to shake my hand, to offer praise, to pledge donations. My parents, however, remained frozen in place. I could feel their stares burning into my back, but I didn't go to them. Let them come to me. Eventually, they did. My mother was the first to approach, her heels clicking against the marble floor as she stopped just a foot away from me. Harper. I turned, a polite smile on my lips. Mother. She hesitated, struggling for words. This was new for her. She had always been the one in control, the one with the power. But tonight? She had none. You sold the country club, she finally said. I did. I sipped my champagne. It seemed fitting. You spent my college fund on Camille's wedding. I figured I'd use something of yours to invest in education. Her lips parted, her face pale. That place meant a lot to us. I tilted my head. So did my future. She flinched. My father stepped forward then, his usual stern expression replaced with something I had never seen before, uncertainty. Harper, you've made your point. You didn't have to. Oh, but I did, I cut in smoothly. Because this isn't just about proving a point. It's about making a difference. Something you never did for me. His jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Because he knew I was right. Camille stood a few steps behind them, her expression unreadable. She hadn't said a word all night, hadn't even tried to approach me. Finally, she spoke. I didn't realize how much you hated us. I turned to her, my smile fading. I don't hate you, Camille. She looked skeptical. I exhaled, taking a step closer. I don't hate you, I repeated, my voice quieter. But I'm done carrying the weight of this family on my back. You always had them in your corner. I never did. And now? Now I have myself. That's enough. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't argue. For once, she had nothing to say. Power shift. As the night wound down, my parents left without another word. Camille lingered for a moment but eventually followed. And I stayed. I stood in the grand ballroom, sipping champagne, surrounded by people who respected me, not because of my last name, not because of my family status, but because of what I had built. I had rewritten my story. I had taken the power back. And as I looked around at the people who now sought my approval, who whispered my name with admiration, I realized something. This wasn't revenge. This was victory. The morning after the gala, the world knew what had happened. Articles flooded business magazines and social media, praising Ruby Events not only for hosting one of the most glamorous charity galas of the year, but also for its bold mission. Harper Cartwright's ultimate power move, turning betrayal into a legacy. From underdog to industry titan, the woman who outsmarted her own parents. The scholarship fund that stole the spotlight. The headlines weren't subtle, and neither were the whispers circulating through my parents' social circles. They had spent years cultivating their reputation. And in a single night, I had shattered the illusion. I knew it was only a matter of time before the confrontation came. The visit. It happened that afternoon. I was in my office, reviewing follow-up emails from sponsors when my assistant poked her head in. Miss Cartwright, your parents are here. I didn't even glance up from my laptop. Send them to the conference room. I let them wait. 15 minutes later, I strolled in, coffee in hand, exuding the kind of confidence that had taken years to build. My parents were already seated across the sleek glass table, looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. Good. I settled into the chair at the head of the table, placing my coffee down with deliberate ease. To what do I owe the pleasure? My mother was the first to speak, her voice tight. That was cruel, Harper. I arched a brow. What was cruel? The scholarship fund? Helping students who actually deserve it. You know what I mean. Her perfectly polished nails tapped against the table, a telltale sign of her irritation. The country club. You humiliated us. I sipped my coffee. No, I exposed you. My father leaned forward, his voice sharp. That club was an investment. I laughed, the sound hollow. An investment? You mean like my college fund? Oh, wait, I placed a finger to my chin in mock thought. That wasn't an investment. That was sacrificed so Camille could have a wedding straight out of a royal fairy tale. His jaw tightened. We did what was best for the family. I leaned back, arms crossed. No, you did what was best for Camille. Silence. For the first time, my mother looked guilty. My father, however, wasn't ready to back down. You got your revenge, Harper. Was it worth it? I tilted my head. This wasn't revenge. His brow furrowed. This, I gestured around the room, this is me taking control. I didn't do this to hurt you. I did this because you made your choice a long time ago. And now, you have to live with it. My mother's eyes flashed with something vulnerable, but she quickly masked it. We were wrong, Harper. The words were spoken so softly, so hesitantly, that I almost didn't believe she'd said them. I studied her. The woman who had spent my entire life looking right past me. The woman who had dismissed my ambitions, my struggles, my worth, as if I were nothing more than a footnote in Camille's story. And now, here she was. Admitting it. I should have felt victorious. Triumphant. Instead, I just felt tired. I set my coffee down. Thank you for saying that. A flicker of hope crossed her face. But it doesn't change anything. The hope vanished. My father exhaled harshly, frustration radiating off him. So that's it? You're cutting us off completely. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. I didn't cut you off. You did, the moment you made it clear I wasn't worth investing in. Another heavy silence. Then, Harper, my mother tried again, her voice more fragile now. You've made something incredible. We're proud of you. I let out a short laugh. No, you're not. You're embarrassed. There's a difference. Her lips parted, but she didn't deny it. My father rubbed his temples. So, will you help us? I blinked slowly. Help you? He nodded. We're in a difficult situation. Without the country club, our connections are strained. And with Camille's divorce. I held up a hand. Stop. He did. I shook my head, exhaling. You didn't believe in me. You didn't support me. And now that I've built something successful, now you want my help. They had nothing to say to that. So, I made it easy for them. No. My mother gasped softly. Harper, please. We're family. I looked at them, really looked at them. For years, I had wanted this. For them to see me. For them to acknowledge that I mattered. But now, as they sat across from me, powerless, I realized something. I didn't need them anymore. I never had. I pushed my chair back, standing up. This conversation is over. My father's face turned red, his hands balling into fists. You're just like us, you know that? You're cold, calculating. I smiled. No, I'm not like you. Because I earned this. With that, I turned and walked out, leaving them behind. Just like they had left me. The fallout. In the weeks that followed, the fallout was inevitable. My parents lost what little influence they had left. Without their status, their so-called friends stopped returning calls. Camille, once their shining star, was now a divorced woman with no job, no career, and no safety net. Meanwhile, Ruby events soared. The scholarship fund gained traction, drawing in investors who believed in my mission. I was invited to speak at conferences, featured in Forbes, praised for turning my personal loss into something meaningful. And my parents? They faded into the background. Their calls grew less frequent. The desperation in my mother's voicemails became more subdued. Until, one day, they stopped calling altogether. And I felt nothing. The final closure. Months later, I stood outside my office, looking out at the city I had conquered. Lena joined me, handing me a glass of wine. You okay? She asked. I took a sip, considering the question. For years, I had wanted closure. Had wanted them to pay for what they had done. But standing here, successful, independent, respected, I realized I didn't need anything from them. Not an apology. Not validation. Nothing. I turned to Lena, a genuine smile forming. Yeah, I said, I really am. And for the first time in my life, I truly meant it. I thought cutting my parents off would be the hardest thing I'd ever done. I expected to feel conflicted, to waver, to question myself. But I didn't. After that final conversation in my office, I moved forward without looking back. I poured myself into Ruby events, into the scholarship fund, into the empire I had built. And my success? It became impossible to ignore. A name that matters. In the months following the gala, my name was everywhere. Forbes Top 30 Under 30. Business Insider's Most Influential Women in Events. The woman who redefined luxury event planning. Feature after feature. Interview after interview. I became a sought-after speaker at industry conferences, my expertise recognized beyond just event planning. My story, how I had turned betrayal into power, resonated with people. It wasn't just about business anymore. It was about resilience, about proving that success was the best revenge. And it was. The same social circles my parents had once worshipped now revolved around me. The people who once dismissed me, who had whispered about how I was the less accomplished daughter, now scrambled to shake my hand, to be seen at my events. I had become the kind of person my parents had always wanted to be, and they were nowhere to be found. Camille's fall from grace. Camille's life, meanwhile, was unraveling. Her divorce from Alex had been messy, splashed across social media and gossip columns. What had once been a fairy tale marriage had crumbled under the weight of expectations neither of them could meet. And now? She was living in a tiny apartment, struggling to find a job that matched the life she once had. She had no experience, no real career, no skills beyond being the golden child our parents had propped up for years. But in the real world, that meant nothing. I heard whispers from mutual acquaintances, how she had applied for jobs at luxury event companies, only to be rejected. How she had even tried to leverage my name, only for doors to be slammed in her face. Because no one in this industry would cross me. Not after what I had built. I never responded to her messages. I didn't need to. She had spent years living in a world where she was the center of everything. And now, she was just an afterthought. Just like I had been. My parents' silence. And my parents? They faded into obscurity. Without their country club connections, without the wealth and status they had built their identity around, they lost everything that made them important. The friends they had once paraded around with barely acknowledged them. The invitations stopped coming. For years, they had gambled on the wrong daughter. And now, they were paying the price. I imagined them sitting in their grand house, one they could barely afford anymore, watching my name flash across the screen as I was interviewed on national television. I imagined my mother clutching her pearls as a journalist praised my business acumen. I imagined them realizing, over and over again, that they had bet on the wrong horse. And yet, I felt nothing for them. No anger. No sadness. Just indifference. Because I had won. Owning the room. One night, months later, I was invited to a high-profile networking event. Not just any event, the event. The kind where billionaires and industry leaders gathered, where deals were made over champagne and whispered conversations. The same circles my parents had spent their lives trying to break into. I arrived in a sleek designer dress, every inch of me exuding power and confidence. People turned as I entered, their eyes lighting up with recognition. "Harper, so good to see you. We should talk. There's a deal I think you'd be perfect for. Congratulations on the latest Forbes feature. Well deserved." I smiled, shook hands, accepted compliments with practiced ease. And then, across the room, I saw them. My parents. They weren't the center of attention anymore. They weren't surrounded by eager admirers, weren't basking in the glow of influence. They were just there. And when my mother saw me, when she realized I was the one people were whispering about, I saw it. The regret. The understanding that she had lost me, not just as a daughter, but as the person she once dismissed. For a moment, she almost stepped forward. Almost reached for me. But she didn't. Because she knew. I had outgrown them. I had built a life they no longer had a place in. And I was never looking back. The final shift. As the night continued, as I spoke with people who truly mattered, I felt something shift within me. I had spent so much time proving myself. So much time fighting to be seen, to be acknowledged. But I didn't need their recognition anymore. I didn't need their validation. Because the world saw me. The industry saw me. I saw me. And that was enough. So, as I left that night, stepping into the car that waited for me, I didn't spare them another glance. They were my past. I was my future. And I had already won. The Ruby Foundation Scholarship Gala was more than just an event, it was a declaration. A statement of everything I had built, everything I had fought for, and everything I refused to let go of. The ballroom was packed with some of the most powerful people in the industry. CEOs, philanthropists, innovators, and rising stars. They weren't just here to celebrate me. They were here to invest in something bigger than all of us. The future. I stood near the stage, watching as guests mingled, glasses of champagne in their hands, conversations buzzing with excitement. Lena appeared beside me, nudging me with her elbow. "You did it." I exhaled, a slow smile forming. "Yeah, I did." A night of impact. The program began with a video presentation showcasing the scholarship recipients, students who had been given a second chance because of this fund. Faces flashed across the screen. A young woman who had been forced to drop out of college to support her siblings, but was now on her way to medical school. A former foster kid who had never dreamed of higher education, but was now pursuing engineering. A single mother who thought her dreams had ended the day she had her son, but was now studying business. Their stories weren't just inspiring, they were personal. Because I had been them. And now, I was making sure they had what I never did. As the video ended, I took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage. The applause was deafening. I gripped the microphone, my eyes scanning the crowd. "My name is Harper Cartwright," I began, my voice steady. "And for a long time, I believed that success was something that could be taken from you. That if you weren't chosen, if you weren't given opportunities, you were destined to fall behind." A murmur rippled through the crowd. I learned the hard way that no one was going to hand me my future. That I had to fight for it, build it, and own it. I glanced toward the back of the room. My parents were there. I had expected them to come, not because they supported me, but because they wanted to see for themselves what I had become. They looked out of place, stripped of the power they once wielded so effortlessly. I continued. "This scholarship isn't just about money. It's about telling people who have been told no, that they matter, that their dreams are worth fighting for, that they are not defined by the circumstances they were born into or the sacrifices others made at their expense." Applause erupted again, louder this time. I smiled. The girl who had been forced to figure something out had figured out everything. Confrontation, one last time. After the speech, I made my rounds, greeting donors, shaking hands, ensuring everything went smoothly. And then I saw them. My parents. Standing awkwardly near the back, watching me. I considered walking past them, letting them sit in their discomfort. But tonight wasn't about the past. It was about moving forward. So, I walked toward them, my posture straight, my head high. They stiffened as I approached, uncertainty flashing across their faces. I stopped a foot away. "You came." My mother cleared her throat. "We wanted to see what you've built." My father nodded, though he looked less comfortable. "It's impressive." I studied them. The two people who had shaped so much of my life, for better or worse. Did I want an apology? No. Did I need one? Definitely not. Because at the end of the day, I had already won. "Enjoy the evening," I said simply, offering a polite nod before walking away. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need anything from them. Walking past them for the last time. As the night wound down, I stood at the exit, watching guests leave, their faces lit with excitement for what the Ruby Foundation was going to accomplish. Lena came up beside me, a mischievous glint in her eye. "They're still here, you know." I didn't have to ask who she meant. "They'll leave eventually," I murmured. She nudged me. "You're really over it, huh?" I turned to her, really thinking about that question. And then, with absolute certainty, I said, "Yeah, I am." I glanced toward the back of the room. My parents were standing there, watching me. For years, I had wanted them to see me, to recognize me, to choose me. Now? I didn't care. I walked past them without a second glance. Because I had already won. Because I had already built my own legacy.